So, good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition, should I say, of the Renny Show. We've got the fantastic Ryan Parke with us today, so I will tell you more, or we will talk more with Ryan shortly. The first thing I must tell all our listeners is that the lovely Jenny, my wing woman, can't be here today. She's really poorly, so she's in her sick bed, trying to get some rest and hoping that the antibiotics kick in very soon and she doesn't feel as rubbish. So she's really gutted to miss Ryan because I know this is going to be a very interesting chat. So lots of love to you, Jenny, and we hope you're feeling better very, very soon. So, Ryan, hello, and thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Hello, Rachel. It's really brilliant to be here. Thank you for inviting me onto the Renny Show, and really sad not to see Jenny as well. Obviously, fantastic that we're here, but yeah,
Yes.
hopefully I'll get a chance to catch up with Jenny at a future date. Jenny, get well as quick as you can. I know that I think this is the first episode you've ever missed, so we're gutted for you.
Not good. Terrible timing. This is an episode she really didn't want to miss, but that's one of those things in life, isn't it? So we roll with the punches and carry on. So for anyone listening, as always, if you want to make comments or if you want to pop us some questions, then please do. We love to carry on the conversation. So if you're watching later on replay or listening on the podcast, then just please get in touch. We love to carry on the conversation. So Ryan Parke, so our guest today, Ryan, the men's health coach, is a guest that Jenny and I have both been very excited about inviting onto the show because his approach to male mental health is quite different to the standard approach that we hear a lot about in the media. And I think, obviously the work that Ryan is doing is getting that message out there, and it seems a no-brainer for us to help to use our platform to get that message out there as well, because whether you're a male or you're a female with males in your life, this is really, really important stuff. So this is going to be a really interesting episode today. So, Ryan, I'm going to make a start with the first question. And what I want to ask is, how is your approach different to the standard approach to male mental health?
I might end up saying that's a good question. That's a good question for all the questions that you asked me. That's really just about thinking time. The main difference that I would say, Rachel, that I'm trying to take and I'm trying to encourage, whether it comes to the work that I do in my own coaching practice, working directly with men, or whether it's down to the talks or the trainings or the corporate programs that I create and that I deliver, I say the main difference is that we start with evidence and we follow the evidence. Really at no part do we want to start using assumptions or taking what works for other demographics and apply it retrospectively to men and then hope it works. And this is really, really liberating, because I regularly work with men who've been reaching out for help for months or sometimes years, and they'll often be told exactly the same thing by everyone, which is, for example, one of the things that men are often told is, oh, well, you just need to talk more. And maybe we'll look in a minute why that's not always going to be the solution. Of course, it can help. But I'd say the main difference is that everything that I try and do has a basis in evidence. And sometimes that comes from one of more than 1,000 sources that I've read, that I turn into the framework I use. And sometimes it comes from the fact that I've seen it work 100 times for different men. And so we're going to roll it out again and see if it works in this instance, so long as it might work, so long as it's safe to do so. So I'd say the main difference is everything is evidence-based. And before we make a change, or before we do a coaching exercise, or before we start measuring a certain hormone in a man's life, we have a reason to believe it's important and it's going to work.
Yeah. So tell me a bit then about where that comes from and why.
So I would take you back then, and for everyone listening, a bit of a warning, which is the story I'm about to tell references suicide, so that you and your listeners and our listeners are aware. So June 2019, I bumped into a lady who I hadn't seen in years, and I was really excited to hear the latest about her son, because Jenny's son Brad was taller than me, more muscular, Some would say slightly better looking. I know that's hard for you to believe, Rachel, but
Of course.
but a strong argument could have been made. But the important thing to know is that Brad had a fast car, big house, and a great job. Plus, he was a dad with a loving wife. And
Yeah.
I like to believe at the time that I was on the same trajectory as Brad, but I was just a couple of years behind because of the age difference. I wasn't working in, I wasn't doing any coaching like this at the time. I was in a completely different field. And then I saw the look on his mum's face, and I wondered, what have I said to upset her? And she said, "Oh my gosh, Ryan, you're asking me how Brad is. You don't know. Brad's taken his own life."
Oh, gosh.
Now, I was really taken aback by that, Rachel. Firstly, because of the loss of Brad, of course.
Yeah.
But secondly, up until that point in my life, I'd always heard and believed that the reason why men take their own life at higher rates than women is because men just don't talk.
Yeah.
And yet Brad was the most open and articulate man that I knew. In fact, I found out after his death that 2 years before Brad died, he reached out for help. One of the ways he did that is he went to see his GP. He said, "Help, I think I'm depressed. I know I'm thinking about ending my life." Brad's GP did what GPs are trained to do in the UK. So Brad was referred to talking therapy, prescribed antidepressants. He attended talking therapy, took antidepressants. And 2 months before his death, his mum, Jenny, who works in mental health, said, "Brad, call me every night. Tell me how you feel. You've got to get these feelings off your chest." Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting for 1 second these things didn't help Brad. I'm sure they did. But what struck me at the time was here was a man who'd done all the things we tell men in crisis to do.
Yeah.
And yet he still wasn't here.
Yeah.
So I wondered what else could Brad have done? And his mum, Jenny, said to me, "Ryan, you should learn about this because every 5 hours, 4 people take their own lives in the UK and Ireland. 3 of them are going to be men. In fact, we lose more middle-aged men, more men aged 45 to 49 from suicide every year in the UK and Ireland than women and girls of all ages combined." Now, I'm not suggesting I'm not suggesting anything to do with importance there. I'm just talking about the scale of the problem, just to perspective. So I took what Jenny said really seriously. There and then I set aside 1 day every week from June 2019 until the end of the year to learn everything that I could about male mental health. And on my very first day of research, I bumped into a study that stopped me in my tracks because it just happened to mention there is 1 day every year where heart attacks in men jump up by potentially around 30%. And yet on the same day of the year, heart attacks in women go down by around 30%. And I was blown away with what it was. And Rachel, can you have a guess what that day is, that day of danger?
Is it Christmas?
Okay, that's a really good guess. The reason why that's a good guess is because on Christmas Day, heart attacks in men do jump up, but they also jump up in women as well. We're looking for up in men, down in women. Do you want 1 or 2 more guesses?
Oh, crikey. Just trying to think of what else there could be.
I'll put you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
But you don't have to feel any pressure because no one gets this right.
Yeah, I can imagine because I'm just racking my brains trying to think what a logical answer might be to see such a marked difference in the way that men and women respond to it. I really don't know.
So the day every year where heart attacks jump up in men significantly and go down in women significantly is the Monday after the clocks jump forward by 1 hour.
Wow.
So this year, 2024, it was the first Monday in April.
Okay.
And when I learned that, I had to know why.
Yeah.
So when the clocks jump forward by an hour, in theory, we should all go to bed an hour early. But have you ever done that? I never have.
No.
So when the clocks change, it's like a mass experiment where almost everyone loses an hour's sleep at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happens in your body when you lose even 1 hour's sleep depends upon whether you're biologically male or biologically female.
Okay.
In a male body, losing even 1 hour of sleep lowers testosterone for days.
Right.
And in a male body, as testosterone goes down, the chances of having a heart attack go up.
Wow.
And when I first heard that, I remember thinking, that's really weird because I was 29 at the time, and I remember thinking, I have never heard anything positive about testosterone.
No.
Like, in fact, I remember when I was a kid and there was a fight in my local pub, my parents' friends used to say, it's no wonder they ended up fighting. There was too much testosterone.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wondered, how can a hormone that causes fights in pubs seem to protect men from having a heart attack?
Yeah.
And I decided next week I've got to learn more about testosterone, this hormone that we all have, but men have in higher amounts than women do typically.
Yeah.
So the following week comes around. My first research question of the day is, why does testosterone make men aggressive? Because that's what I'd always heard. And it turns out testosterone does not make men aggressive. That's a complete myth that was disproven decades ago.
Okay.
Now, knowing that testosterone isn't bad, my next question was, why does it seem to protect a man's heart?
Yeah.
And 5 years on, I can tell you there are lots of very specific reasons why low testosterone is dangerous to heart health in men. But rather than go into that, what I found out on that same day is not only does testosterone seem to protect a man's heart, it also seems to protect his mental health.
Yeah.
Multiple studies of men of all different age groups have found that on average, men who are depressed have around 30% lower levels of testosterone than men who are not depressed.
Right.
And the only study of its kind found that on average, men who have taken their own lives had even lower levels of testosterone in their body at the point where they died.
Wow.
So then I was very interested, because in the UK and Ireland today, the single biggest killer of men from the age of 18 to the age of 50 is unfortunately suicide.
Yeah.
Now, suicide in men and depression in men are both linked to having a low level of testosterone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Across different age groups. The next biggest killer of men, or more accurately, the biggest killer of men in the UK and Ireland over the age of 50 is heart disease.
Yeah.
And in men, heart disease, heart attack, heart failure, and high blood pressure are all preceded by and predicted by having a low level of testosterone.
Right.
So this means they don't just occur at the same time. Low testosterone
No.
first and gives you a warning sign. And then after heart disease, the next biggest killer of men in the UK and Ireland is cancer.
Yeah.
The most likely cancer that man would be diagnosed with by a long way is prostate cancer.
Yeah.
And the single biggest indicator, the most reliable indicator that a man will develop prostate cancer, yes, we're regularly advised to check for high PSA levels, but more accurate than that, low testosterone is the biggest indicator of prostate cancer risk in men. In fact, multiple studies that I know of have recommended, rather than screening PSA levels, would be better to screen low testosterone levels in men. That would detect more prostate cancer and it would detect it quicker. So this was my first 2 days of research. My first 15 hours had completely flipped the way I saw male mental health, because I started out believing testosterone's bad and men just need to talk. And after about 15 hours of research, I was starting to think, hold on a minute, testosterone isn't bad. It's actually vital.
Yeah, it's really important.
Really important. But this is something that no one tells men, no one tells boys. And worse, there's actually stigma associated with testosterone that prevents men in need from finding out this information when they actually could do with learning it. And the other thing I could see pretty early on as well, Rachel, is that it seemed just from that initial research to be a bit oversimplistic and potentially misleading to suggest that the reason why men might be dying at higher rates than women is because they're not talking. There seemed to be a lot more to it than that, especially when you start coming into things like hormonal health. You know, that talking is not necessarily going to adjust issues with hormonal health.
Crikey. And it just, you know, and I've heard you talk on this subject before, and it just strikes me as crazy, but maybe just par for the course in some ways, that, you know, the standard advice is, oh, men, you just need to talk more and then everything will be okay. And, you know, whilst there is definitely a place for that, and I'm sure there always will be, the other risk factors just aren't being looked at, you know, and you've referred there to one study of its kind, you know, the only one. Well, my immediate thought was, why is there not more study in this area to prove it even more that this needs to be looked at in a different way. It's crazy.
It actually gets worse. So if I hone in on that study that I mentioned, is it okay? What I'm about to talk about is a study in detail where hormonal levels were taken from men who had already taken their own lives. It was their bodies. So that's not going to be for everyone who's listening. I completely understand that, but we can learn a lot from this study. So, so the study was carried out decades ago. The lead author was called Rowland. This is a published study. What they did is they looked at the bodies of men who arrived in a morgue in America for a period of about 12 months, and they measured their testosterone levels. That study is regularly quoted as saying that young men who take their own lives have high levels of testosterone in their body. It's regularly quoted as saying that by other studies. So I just took that at face value when I first read it. As you would. This is a published, peer-reviewed study that says that high testosterone is associated with men taking their own lives. Then when I revisited it about 6 months into my research journey, and at this point I was working with men, I was coaching them and having amazing results very, very quickly by helping them improve their hormonal health. So this study never left my mind. I was like, I always have to, because that's the study that kind of said the opposite. And then one day I was reading the study and I decided, let's just translate these units from the American figures to the English figures, to the European figures. So I'm going to give you a bit of jargon here, but the important thing to remember is just the numbers. Don't remember anything else.
Okay.
So the study says that men who take their own lives have high levels of testosterone because the study had two groups, those who had taken their own lives and those whose bodies had arrived at the morgue because they had died suddenly.
Right.
And they were comparing the two. And what they found is the men who had taken their own lives had higher levels of testosterone than the men who had a sudden cardiac event.
Right.
But that's a silly comparison because number one, there's no healthy men in this study. No. Number two, it's known that low testosterone is associated with risk of heart failure.
Yeah, as you've said. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's like zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
The average level of testosterone in the Western world now in men is thought to be about 18.4 nanomoles per liter. Don't worry about nanomoles per liter. Just think of it as X.
Yeah. 18.4.
Decades ago, it was much higher than that, just so we're all clear. Testosterone levels in men are declining every single year in the Western world. Wow. But decades ago, it was much higher. But now it's thought to be around 18.4. The level of testosterone found in the men who had tragically already taken their own lives was 11.7. This study is regularly quoted. Other studies will say that these studies found low testosterone is associated with risk of suicide in men, but this study found high testosterone. And they will regularly quote the Rowland study. And this is the lack of context that surrounds research into male hormones. People can read a study, not know they're looking at a low level of testosterone because they just don't know the context. They get it published. The publisher doesn't know the context, and everyone reading it, including other peer-reviewed academics, are publishing their work, quoting this one, and at no point has anyone stopped to look at the context of it. This is what we're up against when it comes to male mental health.
Wow, it's just crackers, isn't it?
It really, really is. Yeah. And so then suddenly when you start to learn this stuff, it's like, oh, we have a real problem here. And if we don't start looking at the evidence we already have, I don't think that there needs to be loads of new evidence carried out into male mental health. There's lots and lots of reports coming out now saying we really need to start seriously studying male mental health. But if we actually start using the resources that are out there, we need to do a lot less research than we think we do. I think that the answers are basically out there. We just need to start using them. And my coaching practice, to go back to the question, like what's different about what I do, is it's based in this kind of evidence. So we know that low testosterone is associated with, higher risk of depression, of men taking their own lives, with heart issues, with cancer, I haven't mentioned, but also Alzheimer's. So we know that all the biggest killers of men are related to low testosterone. So why don't we learn how to naturally increase our testosterone levels? That was my original question 5 years ago. And now it's my full-time job. There's a lot more to male mental health than testosterone levels, but that's what got me into it. Was trying to understand that. Now it's one small part of what I do, but that's what got me into it originally.
I think we just had a bit of a sound issue there, but you're back. You froze for a moment, but
oh no,
that might be
yeah, I am. I should be okay. I've got super duper broadband. It's quicker than lots of businesses have. I just paid a lot of money for it, so hopefully it's all good.
Oh, fingers crossed. Okay, so I'm going to conveniently move on to the second question, because it's very much tied to a lot of what you've spoken about in that first question. So it actually leads on quite nicely about why do you think that the statistics for male suicide are so high? Obviously, you've talked about the lower testosterone levels, and that being a good marker for various sort of health conditions and for suicide. But why do you think the statistics themselves are just so high? It's awful.
So to give an answer to that, I would actually quote the Samaritans from a brilliant 2012 report, which was called Men, Suicide and Society. Anyone who's interested in the topic, I think you just have to read this report by the Samaritans. And to quote the Samaritans, they said that the specific psychological factors associated with men taking their own lives are not being addressed by the current solutions that are available to men. And so you might think, well, hold on a minute, Ryan, what does that actually mean? I'm going to give you one single example here, and then we're going to look at how that scales. How does that play out? So we've spoken about testosterone. Let's talk about another hormone. This is a hormone that lots of us have heard about, especially if you've had a child at some point in your life. This hormone is called oxytocin. And oxytocin is regularly known as the love hormone or the cuddle hormone, which is kind of interesting because it doesn't actually have anything to do with love in people who are biologically male. So why do I want to talk about oxytocin? So oxytocin is released when we touch those we care about, when we cuddle, when we hold hands, and when we talk about how we feel.
Yeah.
Now, oxytocin is a hormone that has been found to significantly reduce stress, not only in women, but in other female mammals.
Okay.
So this means lots of women's lived experience in life is when I touch those I care about, when I cuddle, when I hold hands, or when I talk about how I feel, on its own, that's enough to reduce my stress levels.
Yeah.
So it could be natural then to think, well, if men were to do the same thing, it would have the same effect on them.
Yeah, obviously, surely.
Obviously, right? Like it's just like 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
But this is where an actual understanding of hormones comes in. So oxytocin has been found to not reduce stress in men, or so far as I'm aware, in any other male mammal.
Right.
So that means that things like touching, cuddling, holding hands, and talking about how we feel, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But lots of men, their lived experiences, there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't necessarily help when I'm stressed.
Yeah, it's not going to make a tangible difference to them.
Exactly. And this is a problem because I regularly meet men in my coaching practice who have been reaching out for help for months or for years. And if they're often told the same thing, oh, well, you just got to talk about it.
Yeah.
And they are talking about how they feel, they often come to a logical but dangerous conclusion, which is if talking alone is the solution, but it's not working for me, then there must be something wrong with me.
Oh, no.
And so my message to those men is, no, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That's exactly what the science says. If you ask me, talking is vital for everyone.
Yeah.
But for men, it's not the solution. It's just the first step towards finding a solution. Yeah. So next, men need to know what to talk about. And most importantly of all, they need to know what to do. One element of that might be, improving hormonal health, but there's so much more to it than that. And I think if we take a step back for a minute and look at some overall statistics, this is where the advice that the Samaritans gave back in 2012 really starts to ring true. So according to the BACP, who are the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, they found in quite a recent study, I think it's about 18 months ago now, but they found that 79% of men agree it's more acceptable to talk about mental health than it was just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That's good news, if you ask me. It means
definitely. That has to be a good thing. Yeah.
100%. We're moving in the right direction, right? The same survey found that 68% of men agree there's less stigma associated with mental health than there was just 5 years ago. More good news, another movement in the right direction. The BACP also found at the same time that on average, the rate of men using talking therapy between 2010 and 2022 increased by around 50%. That's not the number of men using talking therapy, which could be explained partly by, population growth. This is the rate of men using talking therapy. This is a massive change. Yeah. So on the face of it, it looks like everything's moving in the right direction, except for this next statistic, because in the same time that most men agree it's more acceptable to talk, in the same time that most men agree there's less stigma associated with mental health, in the same time that men have become 50% more likely to use talking therapy, men in the UK and Ireland have also become, according to the Office for National Statistics, 14% more likely to take their own lives.
Oh, that's terrible.
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that these things aren't helping.
Yeah.
But what I am suggesting is, if we go back to the advice that the Samaritans gave at the beginning of that increase in 2012, the Samaritans warned that traditional talking therapies aren't actually addressing the specific factors associated with suicide in men.
Yeah.
And so to be able to say something like the reason why men take their own lives at higher rates than women is because they're not using talking therapy or they're not talking about how they feel. To arrive at that conclusion, you have to firstly not understand the hormones involved. And you'd need to secondly have evidence suggesting that talking therapy is effective for men who are thinking of ending their own lives. And yet the Samaritans back in 2012 said we need to be aware that it's not particularly effective at that. There are lots of proven uses for talking therapy. We're talking about a very nuanced part of mental health, which is in men addressing the factors causing them to have that crisis. And talking therapy is not found to be very effective at that.
No. And you know what I also find quite interesting? I'm currently taking a level 2 course in self-harm and suicide prevention and awareness. And not once, I'm on the last module now, not once has it been mentioned that talking might not be the best option when it comes to men, that there's more to it. And, that can be a stepping stone, but it might not be the right thing for that person. So that also makes me wonder, going back to what we've spoken about earlier about what GPs say, the standard option of refer you to some talking therapy and prescribe you with some antidepressants and on you go kind of thing, and everything will be all right. Well, clearly that's not working when you talk about the statistics for male suicide. So, it's, I notice you do work with NHS trusts. Are you seeing a change?
Yeah, so that's quite a recent thing that started happening, which I genuinely can't believe. Like, a few years ago, I started out just working with a couple of men on a one-to-one basis. What really kicked things up to me was I had the amazing invitation back in, I think it was 2012. I was invited to give a talk at TEDx in Enniskillen in Northern Ireland.
Yes. Yeah.
So I went and I did that. That was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. But the good news from it was that actually after that, organizations started reaching out saying, can you come and deliver some training to our team? And at first I thought well, are they going to like this kind of thing? Because it's really different. But no, I found that the response was brilliant. Most places where I speak, in fact, I'd say generally all places where I speak, the response is like, why haven't we gotten this information sooner? Because I'm not saying don't talk. I'm not saying don't attend talking therapy. I'm just saying, if you attend Samaritans listening training, they say when you're when you're signposting to solutions, you need to not make them seem like a one-size-fits-all solution. You need to make sure people are aware of the limitations. We don't do that with talking therapy. it's like, oh, well, the problem is because you're not in talking therapy. So, yeah. And then in recent months, what started happening is a couple of NHS trusts have started reaching out. I've worked with 4 different NHS trusts now. And I recently delivered one of my workshops is called Mums with Sons, having supportive conversations with men and boys. And I recently delivered that for an NHS trust. And we always collect anonymous feedback afterwards. And one of the pieces of feedback that came in, someone said, I have been working in the NHS for more than a decade. Most useful piece of training I've received.
Wow.
And when I saw that, I was like, honestly, Rachel, I was really taken aback because, Mums with Sons had a really hard birth. I was asked to create it by a lady who does amazing work, who's called Debbie Roberts, who's the CEO of the Ollie Foundation.
Yes. Fantastic organisation. Yeah.
They're really brilliant. They're a suicide prevention organisation. They're in St Albans. They deliver training to people who support others. They're a really good organisation. And now one day we were having a conversation and I went off on a rant and I was like, well, of course men are dying because this is what works. But instead of offering them that, we offer them this. And Debbie was like coaching and trying to bring out the solution. She was like, well, what should people do differently? And I was like, well, it's so stupid what we should do. And I just went off on this rant. And at the end of it, Debbie was like, please create some slides and turn that into a workshop.
Yeah, put that into a talk. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that became Mums with Sons, which I was really scared of doing at first because I didn't want to come across like I was like mansplaining or something. Like, I didn't want to be like, look, I'm a man, this is how it works. But I temper it with all kinds of warnings that like I'm not a parent, not yet. I will be soon. Yeah, there we go. Little exclusive there. So yeah, I let people know. Look, I'm not a mum. I'm not yet a parent. But if you're interested in knowing what I've learned from my experience coaching these hundreds of men, here are some tools that you can use and add this to your toolkit. So yeah, response from NHS Trust so far has been really brilliant. I'm in conversations with at least one trust about, I have a corporate program, where we've rolled out so far, the response has been brilliant. It's been really good. It's all about community and education and providing support, really like engaging men within organizations so that they want to use the brilliant wellbeing support that was already in place. But first we have to kind of capture them and motivate them and show them that it could work for them. I'm currently in talks with at least one NHS trust about potentially rolling out my corporate program in an NHS trust, which is like, wow, like what a moment. So yeah, it's very exciting.
I mean, that's incredible. I mean, you heard it here first, folks. That first of many, I hope. That's just incredible to think that's the reach that could have could make such a huge difference. So wishing you absolutely all the best for that. That's incredible. Well done you for getting yourself to a point where that's where things are going. That's brilliant.
Thank you so much. I had a really I was just going to say I had a really nice piece of feedback because so I'm not a medical person. I'm not a clinical person. I'm not a counselor. I'm always very clear with people that I am a coach and that what we're going to do is it's going to be a series of coaching exercises and practices that are going to help you find your own solutions. But we're going to combine that with the evidence base of what do we need to address, whether it's goal setting, the hormonal health, the financial security, the motivation in your life or the life purpose. We're going to combine that framework with normal coaching stuff. And a little while ago, I was doing like a tech check. This wasn't an NHS trust, but they were a very clinical company. And I said at one point that, obviously bear in mind, I'm not a clinical person. And one of the directors, he literally stopped me in my tracks. He said, do not apologize for that. He said, we are booking you because of the fact you don't pretend to be anything. You come along and you say, look, this is what the evidence says. And here's the evidence. And here are the sources. And if you need any help interpreting it, I'm here, but I don't want to be a gatekeeper. He said, no one's really doing that. People come along and say, look, here's a drug you can buy. And he said, you're coming in like, guys, I think the answers are here. Should we look at it together? So he said,
I mean, collaborative, brilliant.
Yeah, he was like, please never, ever apologize for what you're doing. You're not pretending to be anything. You're just saying, let's look at this 1,000 sources together and let's see what we can pick out of here.
Yeah, amazing. Well, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, because that's brilliant to hear. More of that. So I'm going to move on to the final question, which it's a bit topical because obviously we've got the Olympics going on at the moment, which we've had some brilliant successes, 2 gold medals just this morning that I've been watching, which is very exciting. What role can sport play in male mental health?
Oh, okay. Right. This is a really interesting question that is really underexplored, unfortunately. So during Men's Health Week a little while ago, I was attending a training from a very large organization who are well known in the space. And one of the things that they said is that the stress of watching sports teams play is associated with risk of heart attacks in men. And I thought, oh, actually, that's not really accurate. So what am I talking about here? Often people hear that heart attacks go up on days when sports teams play matches. I don't think that's much of a secret. There's quite a few studies that have found that. A little while ago, I started to wonder why. So here's a couple of things that we know. We know that heart attacks jump up in men on days when sports teams play. We know that low testosterone in men is associated with very, very quick risk of heart attack. Yeah. So there's another study which kind of brings all that together, which is back in 1994, the World Cup final was Brazil versus Italy. And scientists traveled to bars where Brazilian and Italian men were watching the game, and they were going to measure their testosterone levels before and after watching their team play. So just for clarity, these men weren't playing. They weren't even playing a video game. They were literally watching the game on the TV in front of them in a bar. And what they found is they took testosterone levels 25 to 15 minutes before the game to establish baselines in the men. Then the match was played. 15 to 25 minutes after the game, testosterone levels in Brazilian men had increased by more than 25%. Now, this was somewhat expected because across the animal kingdom, especially in our closer relatives like monkeys and apes, when the males compete and win, their testosterone levels increase. Yeah. But also across the animal kingdom and in men, when they compete and lose, their testosterone levels crash. But these men weren't competing, they were just watching. Yeah. And what they found is in the same time frame, so 25 to 15 minutes after the end of this World Cup final, testosterone levels in Italian men had crashed by more than 25% compared to baselines. That's a massive drop. Yeah. And the interesting thing, a couple of interesting things. So number one is this shows that just from watching sports, men go on the same hormonal and emotional roller coaster as if they're actually playing. Yeah. So this is one thing to learn from that study. There's some other interesting things to learn from the study, though. Another interesting thing to learn from the study is that this was a match that no one knew who was actually going to win until Italy missed the final penalty in the penalty shootout. Yeah. So the hormones only had about 15 minutes to adjust, and yet there were 50% difference between the men who won and the men who lost. And so here's where it gets really interesting. So watching a sports team lose creates this massive drop in testosterone levels. We know from our conversation earlier that low testosterone levels in men precede and predict risk of heart attacks. Yeah. And now we can start to bring together all this information and we can see, on days when sports teams lose, fatal heart attacks in male fans jump up by between 30 and 50%. And so this is often put down to the stress of playing. But if you understand the literature, the studies, you know it's not the stress of playing, because when men watch a stressful game, but their team wins at the end, there's no increased risk of heart attacks. It's not the stress of watching. It's the hormonal impact of your team losing that spikes these heart attacks in men. And so this is a really big problem. I regularly work with men who feel down or depressed or unmotivated after watching their sports teams lose. Yeah. And I was working with a guy a couple of years ago who he created a whole new approach that we use from time to time. It's a pretty simple strategy, but I was working with this guy, and he used to feel down and depressed and unmotivated after his sports team lost. His football team lost every weekend. They were having a bad season. It was causing problems at work. His partner was starting to talk about them living separately. And so he'd also been to couples therapy at that point. And the best advice he had so far was, why don't you stop watching football? Now, it seems quite obvious, but that was not an option for him, because he was he was a bit of a player himself. He came from a football supporting family. It just wasn't a practical option. And so I took him through the science that I just spoke about with you. I've got, when I do training, I have lots of slides showing the exact levels and fancy like that. But we went through just the basics. And he said, hold on a minute, Ryan. Are you telling me that watching my team lose every week might be crashing my hormonal health, and that's why I'm grumpy and unmotivated and feel down for 3 days every week?
Yeah.
I said, well, maybe. He said, so what would happen then if I just started watching them win more often? And I said, how are you going to do that? And he said, next time they lose, I'm going to go on YouTube and watch an old video of them winning the FA Cup. So like, I was like, well, yeah, sure. I mean, there's no harm to it, right? Like, it's only a couple of minutes. It's not going to waste his time or anything. Why don't you do that? It might make you feel a bit nice. Anyway, so a week later, I get a text message from his partner. Bearing in mind, they were at like emergency stations before this coaching call.
Yeah.
And a week later, I get a text message from his partner, and she says, hi, I don't know what kind of work you two have been doing together, but he is a new man. Please keep working together. But I hadn't seen him in a week, so it wasn't down to me.
No.
All he was doing, Rachel, was when he saw his football team lose, straight away, he didn't waste any time. He just went straight on YouTube and he watched an old 2.5-minute video of them winning the FA Cup. It was very old.
Yeah.
Then he felt so good that he started watching it again before important conversations at work, before he went to the gym, before he got home and walked through the door. And it just picked up his mood. And in the longer term, he says it transformed his mental health, which actually, from a scientific perspective, makes perfect sense. You know, men with low testosterone are depressed, or at least we can say that they're at much higher risk of depression. There are other reasons why men could be depressed. So, yeah, that is the sort of thing that I love about male mental health, because on the face of it, of course, it's a complex topic, and I never want to be accused of oversimplifying things, but we also don't want to overcomplicate what is sometimes quite a straightforward thing, which is if your hormones are suffering, your mental health is going to suffer. Like, if anyone that's debating that, it needs to learn a little bit more about hormones. So that's what I love about male mental health, which is, on the face of it, yes, it's a complex topic, but with a bit of an understanding of the hormones, what's going on under the bonnet, sometimes the solutions are a lot more simple than we first suspect they will be. And I'm regularly criticized when I tell that story. People sometimes in a chat at a big webinar, someone will be like, oh, that's all I need to do then is just watch an old video of my team winning the FA Cup. And I'd say, before you criticize it, try it. Because it really works well. I've used it in my life. It's been really amazing. I'm one of those people who believes that the NFL, American football, is a real sport. And I follow a football team who's been doing terribly for about 10 years. Doesn't get me down anymore. Every time they put in a terrible performance, I watch a very old video of them winning the Super Bowl. It's from 12 years ago. Doesn't matter. It makes me feel great.
Yeah, and that just strikes me as a really simple tip that anyone listening can take away, that, find your equivalent of that YouTube video for those moments. I suppose to a degree, it doesn't even matter what it is. It could be any sport, it could be any scenario, but find what that thing is that's potentially going to help you feel back brighter again, and almost, I guess, reverse the negative impact on the testosterone from the loss, watching the loss that you saw. It's really interesting. Love it.
I think.
Okay, well.
I was just going to say, after I watch England lose, which does happen from time to time, all I do is I just go straight on YouTube and watch an old video of the last 2 minutes of them winning the World Cup in 1966. And it's like, your hormones don't know. Obviously, your hormones don't know the difference between you playing and you watching, else you wouldn't have the drop in testosterone from the loss. So just watch it. It doesn't matter if you've seen it before. It's a really, really amazing tip.
Incredible, just incredible. So try it, folks, and I'd love to know how you get on. Does it make a difference? Do you follow a team that's not having the best success? Does this make a difference? We'd love to know. So Ryan, it's been absolutely fab having you answer my questions. Thank you so much. It's actually now your turn to ask me a surprise question. So what have you got for me?
Okay, so I'm looking forward to this because before I came on, I was aware of your work, specifically around coaching, whether it's group coaching, whether it's one-to-one coaching. And so the question I have for you, Rachel, is this, and I might be cheeky. This might actually be two questions, but I'm going to try and get the grammar so that there's only one question mark in there. So my question for you is, what do you think is the main obstacle that prevents us from making lasting positive change in life, and how do we deal with it?
Sorry, I've just had a bit of a sound issue, I think. Would you mind repeating the question, please, Ryan?
I will repeat it as many times as you need. So my question is, what do you think is the main obstacle that prevents us from achieving lasting positive change in life, and how do we deal with it?
Right, I'm just trying to get that typed into the chat bar. So what do you think is an obstacle that prevents us achieving... What came after that?
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put it in my chat bar. So if you could just...
real sound issues. I can't hear you properly.
Okay, 2 seconds.
Oh, sorry about this, folks. If you're listening, hopefully you can hear us properly. Should we just try that one more time?
Yep. I'm also typing it into the chat, the private chat for us. So what is the main obstacle that prevents us from making lasting positive change?
Right. I'll just grab that in the chat. Oh, it's not showing in the chat. Oh dear. See, this is the joy of broadcasting live. We sometimes do have some challenges with the technical stuff. However, I'm nearly there. I'm just going to put it on the screen so that you can all see it if you're watching. I think it might be my internet connection that's the problem, because everything's a bit slow. So what is the main obstacle that prevents us from making lasting positive change? I think the main obstacle is the way that we talk to ourselves. And funnily enough, I was talking about this this morning at a networking meeting I was at. I think we are all subject to conditioning throughout our lives, whether we want to or not, or whether anyone intends to or not, be that from parents, teachers, employers, the people that we come into contact with. And I think it can be really difficult to address what some of those messages tell us. So that the typical one might be that self-talk of you're not good enough. Maybe when you were doing PE at school and you were competing in the running round the track, and you were always last, which would be me. And maybe that message was reinforced so many times about not being good enough, about being slow, about not being as good as everybody else, made to feel second best. And I think obstacles like that, they stay with us. We find ways, subconsciously and consciously, to proliferate those messages and to confirm the bias that we have against ourselves. We almost look for scenarios that confirm what we think. Excuse me. And I think that can really prevent people from, excuse me, God, first it's technical problems, now it's my throat. I think there's a really strong link here with your level of self-belief, because I think when you have a really strong foundation of self-belief, and you're on a personal development journey, you're better equipped perhaps to try and fight those, really develop your self-awareness around these messages and think about, is that message actually true? Is that my voice? Or actually, is it that PE teacher's voice? And this is nothing against PE teachers, by the way. I love my PE teachers. But, is it someone else's voice that's telling you this message that you then therefore carry it throughout everything you do in your life, and have this thought all the time, well, I can't do that because I'm not good enough and I'm just not going to be as good as everyone else, so why bother? And you therefore end up staying in your comfort zone, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy then, because it just continues. So I guess for me, the biggest antidote then becomes the self-awareness, which we build through, I mean, there's so many different ways we can build our self-awareness, isn't there? You know, reading books and listening to podcasts and talking therapies, and you know, there are so many different ways, writing, journaling, so many ways we can get in touch with who we are and what matters to us, and what's actually driving things forward, and then try and get rid of those negative messages that we tell ourselves that then hold us back. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Absolutely, yeah. It's mindsets and limiting belief.
Oh, I lost you for a second there.
Yes, that you answered my question really well. And before I came on, I was feeling the pressure, like, what am I going to ask? And then I thought, well, hold on, what do I actually want to know from Rachel? And then I just started writing out loads and loads of questions. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I really, really like the answer to that question.
Excellent. Well, thank you for bringing such a fabulous question, and I hope everyone listening really enjoyed that. I, for one, I mean, Ryan, we've talked for just over 50 minutes now. It's gone by in a flash. Thank you so much for giving up your time to be here, because time at the end of the day is the most precious resource that we have. So thank you for sharing your time with us. It's been utterly fascinating to chat to you and to find out more about the things that you do. And I'm really hoping that whilst some people may have found some of the content upsetting, in terms of education, the messages that you're bringing to the world are so important. And, you know, the more we can spread these messages, the better. So my encouragement to anyone listening is to connect with Ryan, follow him, and, you know, share what he's doing. Can you tell us, Ryan, what's the best way for people to do that? Where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks so much. So this is what I do for a living. My name is Ryan Parke. I share the science of male mental health in talks, in training, in my coaching programs for men, and my corporate programs for brilliant organizations. And if any of what I've said has resonated with you, you can reach out to me through my website, which is themenscoach.co.uk. You can also follow me on social media. On everything, I have the same handle, which is Ryan Parke, which has an E, and then TMC, which stands for the Men's Coach. So it's at Ryan Parke, TMC. But the easiest way to get me is just fill in the inquiry form on my website, and I'll give you a call back.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And I will make sure that's put in the show notes as well for the podcast. So all that really remains is for me to just say a huge thank you to you, Ryan, for joining us. It's been utterly fascinating and brilliant. So do follow Ryan, everyone. I'm sure you'll agree from what's been said today. He's got some really interesting and exciting things going on. So do follow him and connect with him. Hopefully, when we're back in a fortnight, we will have the lovely Jenny back with us, no longer unwell and no longer suffering in her sick bed. So much love to you, Jenny, if you're listening. Hope you're feeling better very, very soon. So do join us in 2 weeks, where it will be myself and Jenny. We've got 2 episodes across the month of August where it's just myself and Jenny, and then we're back into guests in September. So thank you to anyone that's listened. And again, huge thank you to you, Ryan. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Get well, Jenny.
Yeah, indeed. Get well, Jenny. Right. Bye, folks. We'll see you again soon.